Hey, Exotical darlings, this is Coco Exotical. Thank you for being here with me. Today, we're going to talk about how they struggled, so now they want you to struggle too. Let's talk about one of the most toxic, backwards, evil mindsets that will actively try to ruin your life, right? The people who think, well, I suffered, so you should have to suffer too. You know these kinds of people. They went through hell. Maybe they had abusive parents. Maybe they worked themselves to the bone in a toxic workplace. They had no support system. They struggled financially, whatever it was. And instead of looking at the next generation and saying, well, I'm going to make sure that nobody else has to go through the hell that I had to go through, they say, well, I had it tough, so you need to have it tough as well. Otherwise, it's not fair, right? They climbed the ladder, then they pulled it up right behind them. Now they're throwing you a broken half-fraying rope and expecting you to be grateful for it, right? And here's the part that pisses me off. These kinds of people are usually the people who claim to love and care about you, right? Your parents, your friends, your mentors, your siblings, people who should want better for you, right? But instead, they're actively blocking your path because your easier route actively threatens their entire identity. Today, we're going to break down the psychology behind this selfish BS, why people do this, and exactly how to protect yourself from these ladder pullers who want to keep you struggling. So let's get into it. So here's what's really happening in the minds of these kinds of people. They've built their entire identity around their struggles, right? When you go through something incredibly difficult and you survive it, your brain does this thing where it tries to make meaning out of that pain, right? It tells you, well, that suffering wasn't pointless. It made me who I am. It made me strong. It made me resilient. It made me worthy. And that's fine. That's actually a healthy coping mechanism, right? But the problem starts when they want to take it a step further and decide, well, if my suffering made me valuable, then suffering is what creates value, right? So anyone who doesn't suffer the same way that I did isn't as valuable and isn't as worthy and simply didn't earn it, right? So that's what's called the just world fallacy mixed with the sunken cost fallacy, right? They need to believe that their suffering was necessary and meaningful. So if you come along and achieve the same things that they did without suffering in the same way, then it threatens their entire worldview, right? If you can get there without suffering, then that means that their suffering was pointless, right? It was optional. It wasn't actually required. You're showing them that there was an easier way to get to the same destination without having to go through so much struggle and strife. And psychologically, they can't handle that kind of truth. So instead of celebrating your easier path, they resent it. They actively try to recreate their own struggles for you, not because it's necessary, not because it's going to help you, but because they need to validate their own pain by watching it repeat in somebody else's life. It's not about you. It was never about you. It's about them trying to protect their ego and the story that they've told themselves about why their suffering even mattered. So let's talk about how this shows up in real life. First is the whole student loan forgiveness issue, right? So this is a perfect example. People who paid off their student loans are losing their minds over the idea of student loan forgiveness. Well, I paid mine off, so why should they get theirs forgiven? I suffered, so they should have to suffer too. Instead of thinking, a lot of these schools are really taking advantage of young people who are trying to get an education and try to get ahead in life. And I wouldn't wish that financial burden on anybody else. They're actively trying to fight to keep other people trapped in the same debt prison that they themselves experienced at that age, right? Then there's the workplace hazing and the so-called paying your dues, right? Oh, well, I worked 80-hour weeks as an intern for no pay, so what makes you so special? You need to do the same thing. Or I was treated like garbage by my boss when I started, so you don't get to complain about being treated like garbage either. So they'll call it, quote unquote, paying your dues or earning your stripes, right? But it's simply justification for abuse in the workplace. They were hazed, so now you have to be hazed. The cycle continues not because it's effective, but because they need to believe that their pain had a purpose, right? Then there are the parents who want to say things like, well, when I was your age. So these are the parents who got whoopings, who were emotionally neglected, who were forced to be perfect, who were given no grace and no space to develop and be themselves, right? And then now they want to turn around and do the exact same thing to their own kids. Oh, my parents were way harder on me and I turned out fine. Clearly they didn't turn out fine if they want to do the same thing to you, right? Then they'll justify their harsh parenting by saying, well, the world is tough. I'm just trying to prepare you for it, right? But in reality, they're just recreating their own childhood wounds, because if they can admit that there was a better way to be raised, then they would have to admit that their own parents hurt them unnecessarily. And that's too much for them to face right now. So instead, they're going to take that hurt out on you, right? So let's be clear. This mindset and this kind of behavior is deeply selfish, hateful, and emotionally immature. Think about it logically. If you went through something awful, then your natural, healthy human response should be, I don't want anybody else to ever have to experience this again either, right? If you were neglected, if you were treated like garbage, you should want to break the cycle, not continue it, right? If you were exploited at work, you should want to change the system, not defend it. If you struggled to get to where you are without any kind of support system, you should want to be the support system for other people, not try to beat them down, right? But the ladder pullers love to do the complete opposite. They actively fight against any kind of progress because your better path exposes that their suffering was actually preventable. And sometimes they're not even conscious of the fact that they're doing this, right? They genuinely believe that they're being fair, or they're teaching you some kind of resilience, or protecting some kind of sacred struggle that builds character, right? But impact matters more than intention. And the impact is that they're blocking you from a better life to protect their own selfish ego, right? That's low vibrational, that's small, that's pathetic, right? That's somebody choosing their own emotional comfort over your actual well-being. Imagine if our ancestors who came centuries before us had the same backwards mindset. Where do you think that we would be right now? And where do you think that the people who are trying to hold you back think that they themselves would be right now as well? You would think that somebody who genuinely loves and cares about you would want better for you than what they had, right? They should want to be the person who breaks the cycle, who makes the path easier, who says you're not going to go through the same thing that I went through, right? But instead, they're actively handing you the same broken ladder in the name of so-called fairness, right? So what do you do when you come across these ladder pullers? You got to recognize the pattern and call it out for yourself. Think to yourself, okay, this is a ladder pulling. This person wants me to suffer so that they can validate their own suffering. So once you see it and you understand it, then you can stop internalizing it, right? It's not about you being weak or undeserving. It's about them being stuck in a toxic mindset. Then you need to stop explaining and justifying yourself. You don't owe anybody an explanation for why you're not repeating their drama and trauma. You don't have to defend accepting the help that they didn't have, or setting the boundaries that they couldn't set, or finding the shortcuts that they didn't know existed, right? Their suffering doesn't need to be your blueprint for life. Then you need to set firm boundaries and stick to them, right? When they say, well, I had it harder, so you need to toughen up, then you can say, well, I'm sorry that was your experience, but now I'm choosing a different path. Or when they try to recreate their own struggles for you, then you can say, well, I understand that that's how it was for you when you were my age, but times have changed, and that's not how I'm doing this right now. You're not arguing with them. You're not trying to convince them of anything. You're simply stating your boundary and moving forward, period. Then you need to seek out people who are actually excited about making the path easier for people, right? Find mentors who say, I struggled so that you don't have to struggle. Let me give you some tips and tricks. Let me show you the shortcuts that I didn't have, right? These are the kinds of people who actually healed from their old wounds. These are the kinds of people who have processed their own pain and turned it into something beautiful and generous instead of something hateful and bitter, right? You can't fix bitter people. You can't convince them that your easier path doesn't invalidate their difficult one. They have to do that work for themselves. Your job isn't to make them feel better about their suffering. Your job is to live your life on your own terms. Take the opportunities that they want to deny you and refuse to carry on the bitterness on to the next person, right? Be the person who leaves the ladder down so that the next person can climb up as well. Be the mentor who shares the shortcuts. Be the one who says, I made it, so I'm going to make sure that you can make it too. That's how you win. Not by suffering the same way that they did, not by trying to hold other people back and trying to keep other people down, but by refusing to pass on the suffering, right? You're not obligated to repeat someone else's trauma in order to earn your own place in the world. Their difficult path doesn't have to be your path. Their struggle doesn't need to be your struggle. Their suffering doesn't validate or invalidate your own success. And when someone tries to pull the ladder up behind them, whether it's a parent, a boss, a mentor, or a friend, you're not the problem, and they and their unhealed wounds are the problem, right? You don't have to suffer just because they did. You don't have to prove yourself just because they built their identity around their own pain and suffering. You get to take the easier path. You get to accept the help. You get to find the shortcut. You get to build a better life than the generation before you. And that's not disrespectful. That's literally the entire point of progress, right? So take the path that works for you. Set the boundaries that they couldn't set. Refuse the struggles that aren't necessary. And when bitter people try to gatekeep success behind the same suffering that they endured, remember that you don't owe anyone your suffering, and their bitterness is not your burden to carry. So tell me about it. Have you ever had people who try to make you suffer just because they had to suffer in life? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.